Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited today because number one, we're bringing back your favorite part of the podcast, which is guest interviews. So I thought who would be so much fun to kind of like kick us off again. So I have my friend and a mentor, a master coach. My friend Jody Moore is here. Now, I want to kind of give Jody a little shout out of what she does, but then I want her to add anything that I miss, like that you're like, yeah, this is something that I really want everybody to know about me. So Jody is a best-selling author. She's a master life coach and the founder of The Lab, which is her amazing program, her coaching program. And she helps people make meaningful changes in their everyday lives, relationships, confidence, health, finances, and personal impact. And Jody is the person that had such a huge impact on my life when I was in a really big funk and not knowing what to do. I was actually able to go to a retreat with Jody, and she kicked my butt in the best way possible, where it actually was something that was expanded my way of thinking about my life and then helped me take personal ownership over how I think and feel about the things that are happening in my life. So I'm so excited to have you here.
Yay!
Want to add to that?
Oh, I remember you at that retreat. That was years ago. We should do those again. That was so fun.
Those were really fun. It's crazy because I look back on that and I still have dear friends that I made at that retreat that I didn't know before.
Yeah,
And so that's been kind
that's
of
cool.
amazing to link back almost almost 10 years ago, 8 years ago. And
Yeah,
it's about those amazing relationships that were made because of a small group of women that were able
yeah.
to just come and then work through some kind of challenging things at that time.
Yeah, because we're doing really intimate, vulnerable work there, and you can't help but connect with people when everybody gets real. And it was, yeah, like you said, a small group. Anyway, so fun. I don't really, I just funny because I went and spoke at a conference just last Friday in Logan, actually, and they read my bio, and I was like, oh, that's outdated. But then I was feeling really proud of myself because I'm like, it's kind of cool that my bio is outdated. And we sent that to them like 6 months ago and it was current then. But I've moved and I changed the name of my program and I've like got rid of the cat that they mentioned in there. And anyway,
It is
so
so fun though
yeah,
to be able to look at your bio and be able to, like you said, like the outdated and be able to say like, but all of that is so true, which is why I wanted to have you
yeah.
on the podcast because you're somebody that sets goals, goes out and achieves them, but then you don't like rest on those, right? Like we're not talking about, like I always say, are we still talking about that winning touchdown at the high school football game or
Right?
is
Like
it past?
Uncle Rico.
Yeah.
Well, I will say this for anybody listening, because I think some people hear that and they're like, oh, I'm not like that. I haven't done anything. And I keep thinking I'm going to. And I've learned this from Dr. Benjamin Hardy, who is an author, and I am kind of loving his work right now. And he says that it's true for every one of us that we are always making progress, actually. And it's a skill to learn how to look back on your past and frame it as progress, because even if results that you're hoping to create in some way haven't moved in the direction you want them to, your money or your health or whatever, um, it's still all progress. You've met somebody you didn't know before, you figured out something that doesn't work or that you don't like. And so he's constantly having in this program I went through with him, he would every week make us go, okay, how is your life 10 times better today than it was a week ago? And I was like, what? It's not 10, it's the same, right? But it is always moving forward. So anyway, just kind of interesting skill to think about. Even if you think aren't moving forward, you always are.
Well, and I think it's a skill to learn how to take ownership of the accomplishments that are happening in your life.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I think that sometimes women aren't very great at is they kind of, oh, well, I just do this. And I'm like, that's amazing. You've picked up your kids for the last 10 years and you haven't lost one of them.
Well done.
Well done. That's amazing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, tell me a little bit about just kind of your personal journey with goals. Have you ever always been a goal setter since you were a kid, or was that kind of a skill that you picked up along the way?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you asked me to come on here and talk about goals, I was thinking about what do I want to say? What am I feeling about this topic right now? Because it changes. And I'm sort of in a place of like, undecided about how I want to think about goals because I feel like there's lots of different ways. And to answer your question, no, I have not always been that person. Like as a teenager, my parents or church leaders or whatever would talk about you need to be setting goals. So you pick something and you have a date and you commit to it and like just basic goal setting, right? Which to me felt well, I just didn't believe that I was good at that because I had lots of proof that I wasn't. Like, I don't follow through. I give up. I whatever. And then there was like, my motivation was like, I should be doing this thing. I'm supposed to do this thing because I said I was going to do it and I'm supposed to have goals. And even into like my, early career days, you might say, when I started working in corporate and getting like sales jobs. As a salesperson, they're very big on goals, right? How many whatever are you going to sell this month? And what metrics do you need to hit in order to make that end goal? And um, at times, it was fun for me to kind of push myself and see what I was capable of. But I would say the majority of that felt very heavy. I still sometimes have dreams that I'm behind in my sales goal and I'm going to be in trouble and I'm stressed because I don't know how to catch up and I feel bad. And so the way that I always used goals up until, I discovered what we do as coaches is I think of a goal as a tool, right? A goal is a tool. It can be a really helpful tool, but any tool can become harmful if
Mhm.
used incorrectly. A hammer is these scissors right here are really useful if I want to cut paper. But I can also use these scissors to hurt myself
Yeah.
really easily if I'm not careful.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I used to do with goals until I shifted and decided to just have fun with them.
I think that that's really important to kind of understand is that, like you said, if we're misusing our goals, then
Mm-hmm.
they do end up hurting us in different ways. They hurt us personally, professionally. We can get really burnt out from them, and that's sometimes what I've seen with my clients is like, is I always say like, are we doing value-based coaching, which is where we align our goals with what our values are so that we're like, hey, this is uplifting, this is, and we're going to have push times and times that we are tired, but like you said, it's like, what really is one of my values? And I know one of yours is fun. And
Yeah.
when you started to kind of transition into, I'm sure it wasn't like, okay, now we're going to make it all fun. But when you started to kind of infuse that in and we're like, okay, it's going to be fun now, what changed for you?
Well, so the reason I got to that place is because after, lots of different more traditional corporate kind of sales jobs and things, I stopped working for a little while. And long story short, I ended up connecting with Brooke Castillo of the Life Coach School. And she was just barely getting her coach training program up and running. And she hired me to just kind of like answer people's emails who were thinking about going through her program. And so it was kind of a sales job, but I was paid like a base salary and then kind of a bonus structure, if you will. So it wasn't a high pressure. She was like, I wasn't talking to people on the phone. I was just answering emails. But as it grew and evolved and her business became more successful and she started to set bigger goals, then my role kind of started to change. And together we worked on like, what are going to be my goals, if you will. And at one point, we kept setting bigger goals to see if we could achieve them. And at one point, we had set a goal that usually I always got close, if not totally hit the goal. And at one point, I had this group I was trying to fill, and I was like nowhere near. There's no way I was going to hit it. I don't even think I was going to fill it halfway. And I couldn't figure out what to do. And I think I was pregnant at the time, which didn't help. But I get on a call with Brooke and I start crying, right? And she's like, "What? Why are you crying?" And I was like, I am so far from this goal. I don't know. I don't have a lot of leads coming in. I don't have a pipeline. I don't know how I'm going to hit this. And she's like, so what? And again, coming from corporate where it was like very serious if you weren't going to hit your goal. I was so shocked at her reply because she's the one who taught me, um, let's just have fun and let's just see what's possible. But then she really like showed up and proved that she really believed that in that moment. She said to me, okay, this is definitely not something I want you in tears over or feeling bad about. Like we're just making all these numbers up, right? This is all made up. And so she said, I don't even want you to get that original number. What do you think you could get easily? And I gave her like half. She's like, just do that. Okay, so we got through that round. Then for the next round, we kind of revisited our strategy and our goals and everything. And she said to me, but let's just do it because it would be fun. Like, wouldn't it be fun? Wouldn't it be cool if a couple of women at home with their laptops who call themselves life coaches, which is like a made up thing anyway, and we just made up this program? And don't get me wrong, we believe we're doing amazing good work, but in the end, it's all made up, right? She's like, wouldn't it just be fun? And that is where I got the fire for like, yeah, you know what? Doing impossible things is fun if you're not beating yourself up with it. If when it doesn't work, you don't make it this big, heavy thing. And so, anyway, that's where my whole like, this is going to be fun. Not that everything is fun, it's not all fun. But the reason for achieving it is just because you want to, just because it would be cool, not because you have to prove something, because you're otherwise everyone's going to be disappointed or your company's going to struggle or whatever. Like, no, just because wouldn't that be cool? Anyway, so
Like
that's
to
where that
think
came from.
about that shift of like, what if it was just fun? What if it was just fun to achieve that? Because I think that that is when we release, like you said, all of the expectations, all of that needing to prove something to ourselves or say, oh, I will become this person when I hit the goal, which is what I see a lot of that. Like,
Mm.
in order to be successful or respected or whatever, I need to do this thing. But really, we get there, and then it's like, guess what? If you haven't done mindset work and you're not working on loving yourself or respecting yourself or having a good time, then you get there and you've achieved something, but you've brought the same mindset with you.
Problems.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
same problem, the same mindset. And so then you're just there and it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that's
It's the
right.
person with the money or the thing, but it's the same mindset.
It really is true. And that's if you get there, which at least then you have the like dopamine hit for a moment of
Yes.
having achieved it, but that doesn't last too long. And then, like you said, all your old stuff catches up with you. And sometimes we don't get there. And that's the number one thing I hear when I go talk to people about goals is they're afraid to set big goals. I'm sure you hear this, right? Because what if I don't get there? And that's where when you answer that question consciously, okay, so what if? Then they're like, then I'll feel so bad. Like, but that part's optional. Like you can feel bad or and you could just decide, okay, I want to be disappointed. I want to feel bad. Or you could just decide right now before you even start. Like, listen, I do a lot of talking to myself in third person in my own mind. And I say things like, listen, Jody Moore, we're going to set this big goal right now because it's been a while since we set a big goal. I kind of want to. Like, I have some energy, some passion here. I need to do something with. Let's see if we could do this. Wouldn't that be fun? And if we hit it, cool. Not like, then I'll be like so proud of myself and everyone will finally see that I'm valid and my dad will finally approve of me. Like, no, none of that. Just like that's going to be cool, right? And if we don't hit it, I'm not going to beat you up. I'm going to be so proud of you for trying. But there's a difference between not hitting it because you tried and your strategy didn't play out and not hitting it because you just didn't try.
Yes.
And what I want to see from you is trying. Let's go. So anyway.
Well, and when you try, there's so many different things that happen because you try, right? You get to
Yes.
show up for yourself. You get to be proud of the actions that you've taken, even if the actions didn't prove to get to the goal line. You get to actually have so many different experiences. Like, that's what I think that people miss out on, is that experience of, hey, what if, like I always talk about, like, I want to be on that New York Times bestseller list. And I'm like, I haven't done that, but guess what I've done in the process? Like, all of these really fun things.
Mm-hmm.
If I wouldn't have even thought, like, if I was back at that, like, well, I have an idea, but it's just so hard. And maybe I need to take more courses and do more things. I'm like, there's so many things that I would have missed out on. And
Yeah.
like, and does it matter that much that I'm not there? Not really. I'm like, I got to have a lot of experiences and I still want to do it. Right. And I still get to have fun doing it. But it's that missing out on the experiences of who you get to become while
Hmm.
trying to get to the goal, whether you get it or not.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Which is why the goal is just a tool, right? The goal is the tool to give you something to strive towards, to give you some focus and direction, to know what to even try, and really importantly, what to say no to, what to not try. If
Yeah.
you don't have some kind of a goal that it's like your filter, right? To decide what do I do, what do I not do, and how big do I go on it, then you just don't know how to make those decisions. And I'm sure you see this a lot. I see this a lot when I'm working with coaches, which is like, well, I'm working on my business. I'm trying, right? That word trying. I'm trying, but I'm just not getting clients. Okay, what are you doing? What are you trying? Oh, I'm posting on Instagram. That's the main thing I hear. I'm
Yes.
posting.
I'm
Okay.
posting on the Instagram.
Okay. Well, that's
Awesome.
not enough. That's not doing it, right? And then I always go back to like, what are we even trying to do here again?
Yes.
Like, are we trying to make a certain amount of money? Are we trying to get a certain number of clients? What are we trying to do exactly? Well, and if you don't know or you haven't like made articulated it to yourself, then it becomes challenging. All the other things that you're doing just because you saw someone else do it don't
Yes.
make any sense. The reason people are doing what they're doing, the people who are succeeding, is strategic. They're not just like, maybe I'll just post a video. I am not just like, I should show up on Instagram today. I do that when I'm like, you know what? I kind of want to build some momentum towards this thing. I need to get people's attention. I need to communicate this step I want people to take. There's a strategy behind it.
Yes. I love listening to Elon Musk talk about this because his whole goal is to get to Mars, right? We want
Mm-hmm.
people on Mars. But then someone was asking him about why would you buy Twitter? That was such a distraction. And he
Mm-hmm.
talked about how it was actually part of the plan. And he was talking about like freedom of speech and all of this. And he's like, if we don't have this part, then everything that I'm doing for Mars doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Was listening to him talk about it, somebody was like, okay, well, then tell us about Tesla. He could say exactly why all of the things that he does ultimately leads to his major goal of getting people to Mars. And I was like, that is so cool that he really
Yes.
think through that filter. And I think that that's what a goal does for us is like you mentioned, like building a life coaching business. If we know specifically what we're trying to do and have that filter, then the things that come up into our view, oh, I should join this program, or I should do this thing, or I should do a new marketing campaign. It's like, well, let's take it through that filter to see
Yeah.
if it actually makes sense. And then you can go from there and be like, you know what? Actually, I don't need to join another mastermind. What I actually really need to do is write that email series because that really did filter through exactly how I wanted it to.
Yes, that's so good. And let me just throw out one other thing, which I'll preface by saying I am not good at this. Maybe you can coach me through it and help me. But this is what I've been playing with in my head is like, and again, this is something I learned from Dr. Benjamin Hardy, as he says, most people use their past to dictate what they're going to work towards. Like, this is how traditional companies are. Like, okay, we made X number of dollars last year. Let's bump it. Let's try to increase that by 10%. So they get what is the goal even comes from the past, right? And we're usually just trying to improve based on what feels realistic or a little bit challenging, maybe. And what Dr. Hardy says is that we should be getting our goal from the future. You don't want to let the past dictate your present. You want the future to dictate your present. And the future can be anything, right? So you look at Elon Musk, who's like, I want to go to Mars. I want to put people on Mars. Like, well, where did he get that from? I don't know. That's a very future thing, right? Um, and now what he's doing is all strategy to get to that future thing, which is impossible. The future for each of us, our future desires and wants are impossible for us because we've never done them. And the reason we've never done them is because we're not able to do them yet. We don't know how, or we're not the kind of person who can, right? And so when you choose a future that you want and don't let the past dictate it, Dr. Hardy says you have to let go of 80% of what you're doing and only keep 20%. And most people do the opposite. We let go of 20% like, I should probably say no to that thing and stop doing that. But we keep 80%. And he's like, that's fine if you want to make little incremental progress. But if you want to make major transformations in way less time than you think, you let go of 80% of your past and only keep the 20% that really strategically closely aligns with the future that you want. And this is, I don't know, I can't even answer the question, what do you want in the future?
It's hard to be able to quantify that for ourselves, right? For the future self of like, what is it that I really want?
I
Because
know.
sometimes it's well, it's different for everyone, but it comes down to feelings. What type of feelings am I wanting? And then what do I think is going to get me there? Well, sometimes we think that it's going to be those past things, but it's not, right? I was
Yeah.
actually just helping a client who has a 7-figure business, and she was telling me, this is what I want for the future. And we were looking at it, and I said, so really what you want is profit. And she was like, yeah, but it's so hard, and advertising and this. And I was
Mm.
like, what if we just cut out most of your overhead? And she was like, that's not possible. And so this whole year we've been working on it, and it was just so fun to see her think through. And now she's not doing as much. She's her overhead's down, but then she's making more profit. And she's like, this is what I wanted. I wanted a simple business, but
Yeah.
I've always been taught that a successful business looks like this. And it was just really interesting to
Yeah.
that sometimes that's what happens with our brains, right? Is with
Yeah.
the goal, we always look to our own past, but then we look to everybody else's formulas.
Yes.
And so we're like, oh, for this business, this is the formula to success. But then we forget to come back to our own values and our own self and say, but does that make sense for me? And my client was like, I want to travel. I want to actually be with my kids. I want to be the one picking my kids up from,
Mm.
I want to be. And so it was just so fun to kind of break that with her and say, but really, like, if it was all possible, what would you do? And she was like, yeah, I actually would have one employee instead of 10.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Oh, yeah. I think that what we actually want is so hard to get in touch with because of, like you said, either well, I can't, that's not possible for all the many reasons, or I'm not supposed to, I shouldn't want that. What's the matter with me? Or I should want this, right? Or this, like you said, I think it just all gets muddy. I was listening to a thing recently that I think I'm going to try out. I'm going to do 30 days of every single day journaling. What do I want? This is what I want, because I'm sure stuff's going to come up in my business, but also in my family, with my health, in my marriage, like with my money, personal things. But like, I have to reconnect with what I want. And every time the brain's like, but that won't work. You can't do that. That's too hard. You don't know how. You just set that aside. All we're doing is journaling. Like,
Yes.
and I'm not even saying I'm going to go after everything I want. I just need to figure out what I even want.
Yes. And that is
Yeah.
so huge for anyone our age, I think. In our 40s,
Yeah.
I think that
Mhm.
I know that I hit that mark when I was like, okay, I'm married, I have kids, I have a house, I have a car, like all of these things. And then I was like, okay, wait, I just accomplished everything that I've been thinking of since I was like 8.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so now what? And I think that I love that idea of like, let's journal for 30 days of what we want,
Hmm.
because you start to run out of things, right? You start to your brain actually hits a roadblock at some point of like, well, you just say that you want something so much, but then what else? If you have to do 30 days of it, you'll
Yeah.
finally to some point of like, oh, what I really, really want is this. Or sometimes we even block ourselves from wanting what we secretly want.
That's
And
right.
sometimes it takes a little bit of that practice to then finally get it out and say, you know what, secretly what I want is like not to be married, or
Mhm.
all of these things that sometimes, like you said, we're like, oh, I'm not supposed to want this.
Yeah. And again, like you said, it doesn't mean you have to go pursue. I think we're sometimes afraid to know what we want because if I discover I don't want to be married, then that means I'm going to have to leave my marriage. And it doesn't mean that. It might mean that you want to work on your marriage and right. Or maybe you do want to leave your marriage. I don't know, but don't be, I think we have to not be afraid to know what we want and to hold space for that what we want changes. It's
Yes.
still a rough draft. The goal is a rough draft, the desires are a rough draft. Like we evolve, we change. And I am it is funny what you said, like us in our 40s. And I was like, I am in my 40s for 3 more days. And then I'm 50.
Yes.
Woo, here we go. And
There's
I am kind of having, I think, with like turning 50 this year and my kids starting to get older and leave the house, I'm having the whole midlife like, wow, okay, the best times are behind me now. My health's only going to decline. My kids are going to leave the house, which sounds awful to me. My, my brain's going to decline. I feel like I've peaked and now I'm on the way down.
downhill from here, which is so funny that we think that, right?
I know it, but in some ways it's valid, and then in many other ways it's not, right? So I'm trying to just give myself space and time to process through that, but also I think it's this whole like, what do I want? I don't have like kind of a big dream or goal out there that I'm chasing. And um I've always done well by having something, and I'm pretty good about not being in a rush to get there, but I need something to look forward to, something to challenge me, something to be a filter for my decisions.
Well, and I do think that that's a good point of like understanding that it's okay to take the time to figure that out. It's okay to
Yeah.
take the time to say, you know what, I don't know what the big goal is right now, but is it time? Because I do think that that's the other thing that people misinterpret about like goals is that you always should be working on something, which I don't believe. I believe that sometimes we do kind of go through seasons of goals, and
Hmm.
that sometimes we're like going and we're pushing hard and we're trying to get something and we're really laser focused. And then sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're just allowing ourselves to be. Sometimes we're doing a little bit of exploring and discovery, but it doesn't have to be that there's a goal every single time.
Yeah, that's a good point. I have a question for you. I want to hear your thoughts on this because this is one of the things I'm wrestling with. Like, what's the most useful way for me to think about this? Do you think it's useful to put timelines on goals? Because that's typically how most people teach goals. But I recently heard it said that like it can be helpful to have like a kind of more like a dream is what I would consider it, and not have a timeline around it. And just take steps forward and know that it's going to take as long as it takes. I'm curious your thoughts on timelines.
I think that timelines need to really be set with actions. That's what I like to set
Mm.
timelines around. So, but when you talk about the dream, I really do think that the dream is something that we're not like by January 1st, I should
Hmm.
have this done. But you might want to, like, for instance, I really want to talk to you about writing books. So if we were to use that as an example, I
Yeah.
would say, okay, Jody, let's get your outline done by what date for you, and then we can say, okay, we're going to write every day. We're going to do this. We're going to get the outline done by this time. But if you were to say, okay, should we put a timeline on the published date of the book? I'd say no.
Mm.
I know from my own experience, clients' experiences, that so much of life happens and that some people get very, very laser focused on the date where
Mm.
they put a lot of that self-worth into the date. So then if their book published date was January 1st, but we push it back to February or even March, they're like, well, I didn't do it on time. And I'm like, why did that even matter? Were
You
we
made that up.
yeah, exactly. We made it up. So why did it even matter? So I like to say action. Yes. Like, let's look at
Okay.
action so that then when you come and you're like, hey, I didn't work on my outline at all this week.
Yeah.
But I did have that goal to get it done. I'm like, okay, well, now we have something to talk about. What happened? Maybe it was a
Yeah.
crazy with your kids. Maybe you felt blocked. Like, we could work through that. But it's the action that we're taking that I think that needs a timeline, not the dream itself.
Yeah. I like that. I always used to separate out into like behavioral goals, which
Yeah.
is like actions like you're talking about, and then outcome goals, right? Because with an outcome goal, if we're talking about, getting 20 new clients in my business, that's an outcome that I can do a lot to influence and I want to own that result, but there are some variables outside of my control, namely 20 people saying yes
Right.
and signing up, right? So, um,
Exactly.
so with that, like you have to take the pressure off,
Mhm.
right? To a certain extent, and therefore a deadline, and a deadline, I guess what you're saying is a tool that can be helpful and also you can use against yourself.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna send out this many emails, or I'm gonna make this many offers, or I'm gonna, you
Yep.
know,
That's all.
those kinds of things are within your control. This reminds me when speaking of sales jobs, I do think that having some really hard jobs in my past helped me today because, when I hear people go, it's so hard, I'm like, this is not hard. You know what I used to do? I used to I was a telemarketer. Okay. So it was before email was big.
Yep.
And I would make like over 100 calls a day to people who had inquired about whatever the thing I was selling at some point, but likely didn't remember it. And that might have been a year ago they inquired or whatever. So a lot of no answers, a lot of wrong numbers, a lot of voicemails, and then every now and then a live person who odds are didn't want to talk to you. But when you did 100 calls a day, eventually you would find someone who was like, oh yeah, I did want to find out about that thing. And you were trying, that's how I sold for ages. And so, my whole point is in this, I had to learn how to sort of compensate my own brain along the way. I had to be like, if we do 100 calls today, that was an amazing day. Well done. And I literally would check off on a sheet how many calls so that I could get the feeling of success from having picked up the phone and dialed 100 numbers,
Yeah.
even if I didn't find any potential buyers. And so I think when you set those, like you said, like I'm gonna have my outline done by Friday, you're getting the little wins along the way. And that's how the goal in the end becomes quote unquote fun, like we're saying,
Yeah.
right? Because you can be proud of yourself as you go.
Exactly. Exactly. So, because I do want to talk about your book, because that is something
Okay, let's do
I
it.
love. I love books.
Oh,
Love
thanks.
your book. It was so much fun. It was so fun. I think the most fun was when I saw it at Costco. I
I
mean,
know, right?
you've arrived when you're at the Costco, right?
Oh, I just in my talk I was telling the story about publishing my book and I showed like 3 pictures that people had sent me of my book in Costco because it wasn't in Costco where I lived. I was in Washington. It was
Yeah.
only in Utah and Idaho. But yeah, that was pretty exciting.
So tell me what made you at first want to write this book? Like what was that kind of spark for you that kind of was like, okay, it's probably time to write this book.
Yeah. I'm going to give you the condensed version of this story, but I think it's a powerful story when we talk about goals because I really wanted to speak at this conference that a certain publisher, who we shall leave unnamed,
Yes.
I'm sure no one will guess who it is. Um, they put on this conference that traveled all over the country, and I wanted to share my work. I want to talk about the model. I knew that it would be really helpful for the people who attended that conference, and I thought it would be fun to speak on the stage. I like speaking. And so you had to publish a book with them to speak at their conference. And so in the back of my mind, I wanted to write a book, but I'm not, writing is not my strength, I should say. And so I was just kind of putting it off until the publisher actually reached out to me. I was building my business. I had a big following on my podcast, and they said, have you ever thought of writing a book? And so I worked with this publisher for over a year. One woman in particular who I love so much. She was amazing. She, back and forth with chapters and edits and it was painful for me just because sitting down and writing and all of that. But anyway, so and at one point she took it to like a marketing meeting. I remember she's like, we were going to call it Better Than Happy because that's my podcast, which it was called in the end. But she took it to this marketing meeting. She came back, is like, they love it so much. They want to do merch. And I was picturing like a Jody Moore Barbie doll, but I don't think that's what they meant. I think they were going to sell journals probably or something. But anyway, so it was so exciting over a year. And I had told her I really want to speak at that conference. And she's like, yeah, I'm sure we can make that happen. Right. So we get to the end and she says, I'm going to take this now to the board. I mean, we had a manuscript in decent shape. She's like, I'm going to take this to the board and then we'll know like publication dates and we can start talking about cover and all that. And I'm like, okay. And she comes back from the board meeting, sends me this email. The subject is news. And she says, everybody really loved your book. They think it's so well written and so well researched. And the president of our company wants you to know that she's been using the model you teach in there and it's been life changing. And that's why it was so hard to hear that they are going to pass on publishing your book. And I was so crushed and I couldn't believe it. Um, And it turned out they just weren't sure that life coaching was something they could back, you know? And anyway, long story short, I published with Faith Matters, which ended up being the perfect fit for my book. Literally, like 2 weeks after I got that email, someone from Faith Matters reached out to me about something different, but they mentioned that they were starting to publish books now. And I was like, I have a book that needs publishing. And anyway, it all worked out. Everything lined up exactly how it was supposed to. And then maybe a month or two after my book came out, I get a message from the original publisher saying, we know we weren't able to publish your book, but we really love your voice and your message. Will you come and speak at this conference? And that was like, oh, everybody says you have to keep believing in your goal, even when it looks like you're not going to achieve it and you don't know the way. And that was such a great, like, real live lesson to me that was true. And anyway, and I just listened to, because I told this story at the talk I gave the other day, and I was like, I haven't picked up that book of mine in, a while. And so I put on the audio of myself. I have to put it on like double speed to be able to tolerate my own voice. But I started listening to it again, and I was like, this really is a good book. I'm so proud of that book. I'm so glad I went through that whole thing.
Well, and I'm so, thank you for sharing that story because I've heard you tell it before. And I
Yeah.
think that that is such a great example of how sometimes it feels like we have reached the absolute roadblock that we cannot get through. And like you said, when we can continue to just believe in our goals and just say, like, I don't know what's supposed to happen, but here we are. I you never know what's going to open to you. And if you just continue to go after that goal and say, oh, that publisher's not available, but this one just called me. Okay, well, it seems like a good fit, and you just never know what's going to happen. So,
Totally. And wait, I got to tell the best part. So speaking of that conference, was so fun because I got to go on the road and meet people and all that. But the publisher, even though they didn't publish my book, they still sold my book, right? And so they have my book for sale in the back of the room. It just means basically when they sell it, they're making probably like a quarter of the profit they would have made off it had they published it. And the women running the bookstore in the back kept saying, gosh, every time you speak, we sell out of your book.
shocking.
I know. It's like, I know, you probably should have published it, right? Which, of course, it's not those women. And I didn't say that to them, but it was really fun
So
to see
fun.
that. So, yeah.
So, for anybody that's wondering, Jody's book is called "Better Than Happy: Connecting with Divinity Through Conscious Thinking." So, it's one of my favorite books. It's something that I continue to go back to. So, thank
Mm.
you for going after
Thank
your goal,
you.
Jody.
Oh, thanks, Carrie.
It's been so fun to talk to you about goals. And, I love you and I so appreciate having you as a mentor and watching you kind of go after your goals. Like you said, you've done so much even this last year, moving, just super fun, kind of adjusting your business so that it's more fun. I know that that's, like you said, one of your values of your business.
Yeah.
And sometimes those things can be scary.
Mhm.
It's scary to take something that we love so much and say, okay, people love this, they know this, but maybe it's not working for me anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe my business needs to be up leveled. And so I think that that's just been such a great example to me of watching you do that. So thank
Thank
you for going with
you.
your goals.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. And I've loved watching you too. Like, look at you.
Look at us doing things.
I
It's
mean, look at us. Isn't it?
amazing.
Seriously, though, sometimes I'm like, it's kind of amazing what we're able to do in the world we live in that makes it all possible. And anyway, yeah,
So true. So true.
so
And
fun.
so anybody that's wanting to connect with you, Jody, tell us a little bit about where we can find you and what you're up to right now.
Mm. Yeah, well, I'm still doing my podcast also, Better Than Happy, and I'm online in all the usual places. JodyMoore.com is my website, but you can Jody Moore Coaching if you prefer social media or whatever.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, everybody, and we will see you next time.